In your view, how the Kakhovka Dam demolition in the Russian-occupied part of Kherson region impacted the Ukrainian military plans to deoccupy its southern territories?
I believe that this event had a terrible impact on many people on both sides. We will only see who was really behind, if it was an accident caused by Russians or if it was an intention, if the intention was just partial destruction or entire. But definitely this event will have an influence not just on civilian population, both in occupied territories and on the territories that are under control of Ukrainian military. It will have an impact on environment, on agriculture. It will pollute the area with different agents and also with a number of mines. It will complicate all military operations, including the Ukrainian operations. So in fact, the area that was flooded is so big that it has an impact on all military operations in the area.
And how do you assess the first days of the Ukrainian counteroffensive?
Well, we saw the beginning that was, let's say, moderate. I believe that we haven't seen the true counteroffensive yet, and more will come. I would call it, with some military experience, as shaping operations.
And are you still of the belief that if Ukraine does not make a considerable advances this year, we will see this war turn into a kind of a frozen conflict with more or less static lines?
What we see today is that preparation for the counteroffensive took months, and quite naturally so, because to prepare significant military force, equip it, train it, get enough resources of all kinds of material takes a long time. It also takes a lot of resources. It also takes a lot of effort of all people involved. So even if we take it from this technical point of view, to get ready for a new offensive will take again sufficient amount of time. If we also consider the weather conditions that are very unfavorable through winter, then we will come to a conclusion that whatever is not achieved this year will have to be postponed till at least spring of next year, with all associated difficulties, including continuity of support. So if I say that we will see a window of opportunity this year, and then whatever will happen will take at least 3-4 months before any activity is generated again, I think it's the right picture.
Mm. And considering that the West constantly is moving in terms of weapons delivery, from defense to offensive, from mid-range to long-range missiles, can you categorically rule out that we won't see Western boots on the ground in Ukraine?
I think this issue is still the same. It doesn't matter if NATO troops join the operation at the very beginning or at the end. Legally, it's still the same. Whatever country or group of countries will join the conflict, it will, by definition, mean that NATO joined the war with Russia. I think no one wants such a war, because with regard to all the weaknesses of Russian military and Russian state, they would very probably restore in such a scenario to the use of nuclear weapons. They indicated it many times. And that's why I think every reasonable politician would probably disregard such an option.
At this stage, do you share the view that Ukrainians desperately need F-16 fighter jets or other Western-made fighters? And if so, when will Ukraine get them?
What we see now is the beginning of training, but unfortunately training for fighter jets takes much more time than training for tanks or armored vehicles. So we can count up to 4-5 months at the earliest before the use on Ukrainian territory. But in my view, we were, and when I say we, I mean all the supporting countries of Ukraine in this conflict, we were probably slow in a number of areas, and we postponed provision of some weapons. I'm proud that the Czech Republic was not among those countries. We were providing everything we could from the very beginning, but some countries were more reluctant. With the development of a conflict, they realized that there is no other way than supporting Ukraine till the success of Ukraine in this war. And that's why they are probably now more willing to provide the equipment that they didn't want to provide at the beginning. We saw it in case of main battle tanks, we see it with the provision of longer range artillery, and we see it now with the training for fighter jets. So hopefully once this training is over, the pilots of those F-16s that are suggested to be provided to Ukraine will be used for much better protection of Ukrainian air against any aggression.
And speaking about NATO, what are your expectations from Vilnius NATO summit, and what, in your opinion, will be a satisfactory summit declaration on Ukraine's membership? And should, in your view, President Zelensky come to Vilnius?
Let me start from the end. I think President Zelensky will be most welcomed in Vilnius. His presence would really mark the importance of the event. What I expect is a really strong language when it comes to long-term support of Ukraine. I see a number of countries agreeing on a long-term plan for support to Ukraine that will not be based on one-off contributions, but on a carefully planned long-term procedure. What I also expect is that the level of current NATO-Ukraine Commission will be raised to the level of Council. That will also mark much better status of Ukraine in this forum. But I would also very much welcome clear language about future membership of Ukraine once the war is over. Obviously, accession process cannot start when the country is still in war. But I strongly believe that all the leaders will understand that having Ukraine on board, both in NATO and EU, is probably the only guarantee how to ensure stability in this region, how to make both NATO and EU stronger, and how to keep Russia and its aggressive policies at bay.
Let's speak about Russia for a little. Could you imagine any peace negotiations with Putin's regime, let's say after some convincing Ukrainian successes on the battlefield, or it should be some Putin's successors not connected to this horrible war with whom both Ukraine and West could communicate?
Quite frankly, right now, I'm not very happy to hear that some Western leaders think about having meetings with Putin. Frankly, I cannot imagine it right now. With the leaders who are so cynical to lie almost at a daily basis, who distort the information, who are able to blame the country they invaded from atrocities. It's very difficult to imagine that one could sit at a table with somebody like that, because if you cannot trust the arguments of your counterpart at the table, how can you hope for coming up to any reasonable conclusion? But hopefully once the situation develops and once Ukraine is more successful in their counteroffensive, I hope that it will bring even Russian leadership to a different position, and they will probably be more willing to come to a pragmatic negotiation. But at this point, I don't see it.
Let me ask you this question. Should all blame for Russian aggression against Ukraine be put on Putin and the Kremlin, or all Russian society bears responsibility for it?
I heard that argument quite often, that we should only take it as Putin's war, not a Russian war. It's not a good argument. When we look at support that President Putin enjoys among Russian population, when we see how many people are supporting the war, how many people are even calling for extending the war on other countries, we have to call it Russian war.
And what do you think about Russia's future? And should the Western countries, including Czechia, maintain ties with Russian opposition outside of Russia? Or are these people just politically hopeless emigrants who won't influence any processes in the future Russia?
When we look at current Russia, not all the people are happy with the regime. Even though support of Vladimir Putin and the war runs up to 75, 80%, then what about those remaining 20 or more percent? I'm sure that not all of the Russians are happy with the losses, with the reduced living standard, with the lack of number of commodities, with no opportunity to travel around, and also with the fact that Russians generally will be for now several generations considered barbarians for what they did. So there is always a chance to find people in Russia who will be able to communicate, who will be a hope for Russia to change. But it will take time. We shouldn't be so short-sighted to isolate Russia entirely. So wherever we find someone who will be able to communicate, who will be able to discuss Russian future under different terms, we should use that opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.